Children, what is something you found out about your parents that you never told them about? My parents started going through a messy divorce when I was in middle school. It was a big mix of things which ended it. According to my dad, my mom was a secret alcoholic and would often pick my brother and I up from school while drunk. When my dad found out, we would randomly get picked up by a friend's parents and they would watch us while my dad made our mom sober up. My dad likes to exaggerate, so I have no idea how much she drank or if she was just having a couple of drinks with lunch. Either way, my mom doesn't know that I know. She picked us up from school drunk. She's definitely not an alcoholic now. She keeps the booze front and center in the house, and it always goes down at a reasonable rate. For my dad, when the divorce was final, he completely shut down. He became a recluse and wouldn't talk to anyone outside of work. He felt like he lost all of his friends in the divorce, but I could tell something else was bothering him. He never really recovered from the divorce and still only interacts with me, my brother, and his siblings. The divorce was finalized about 8 years ago. I was talking with my uncle, my dad's youngest brother, who roomed with him in college, saying how worried I was about dad being lonely as he approaches 60. My uncle told me to never let him know that I know, but apparently my dad was engaged to another woman when he was in college. They had been engaged for 6 months when my dad contracted an infection from his fiancee. Turns out she had been cheating on him for years with the rest of the football team. I guess he never recovered from that because it explains a lot of his controlling behavior and his distrust of anyone but a blood relative. I always want to tell him I know and that it's okay for him to talk to me about what happened, but I also don't want to betray my uncle's trust and ruin one of my dad's last good relationships. He recently found out his sister and mother were keeping a small secret from him and threatened to never speak to them again. He has a lot of trust issues and abhors being lied to. Story 2. The circumstances of my parents' divorce. I was 10 when they separated and they never really told us why, just that their marriage wasn't working anymore. I didn't really care, so I didn't ask, but over the next few years, I would eavesdrop on bits and pieces of conversations they had and eventually put the pieces together. Basically, my mom cheated on my dad with my now stepdad. My mom and now stepdad worked at the same high school, and my mom had taught each of his kids. When my dad became suspicious, he put a keylogger on the family computer and put her phone and found some suspicious texts, emails, searches, etc. He hired a private investigator who followed my mom to the airport one day and struck up a conversation with her. My mom took the bait and ended up confessing everything to the private investigator under the impression it was some random stranger. I was introduced to my now stepdad a little under a year after they separated, but didn't meet any of his children or family until a few years later. Turns out he was having an affair as well, but was introduced to me and my brothers while he was still with his wife. I don't think any of my parents know that I know this, and it's not something I would ever bring up with them. I love all my parents and step-parents the same, and although they all did some crappy things, they all seem much happier now than they did when they were married to one another. I always thought private investigators in general were kind of sketchy, but it sounds like this guy's dad got his money's worth out of that one. Story 3. My dad thinks my mom is insane. He regrets his entire relationship they had since they were teenagers. That's not it, though. My dad is even more messed up than my mom. He has serious emotional issues. Being in prison tamed him in the sense that he doesn't feel in the position to act on his impulses. But he still has them, and I see it. My mom and dad had an victim codependent relationship made in hell. She says she stayed for the kids, but the whole reason why she had us in the first place is because she was trying to train a man to look after her. She is incapable of taking care of herself to this day. My dad thinks I am exactly like her. He also won't say that. He really doesn't like me, and I used to be scared he would do something to me, but he won't do anything now because 1, he's old and needs someone to take care of him. He knows his wife would leave him in a heartbeat, contrary to my mom. She doesn't actually need him. 2, I am diagnosed mentally ill, and as far as he's concerned, I am totally crippled, which pretty much guarantees that I'll either stay by his side until he dies or will run to the first person that can financially support me. They don't know that I know why they did all of that. It's pretty sad. They are both so afraid of being old and alone. Story 4. I found out my dad was a paranoid schizophrenic one night when I overheard my grandma praying for him. She thought I was asleep. I was like 16, but genuinely thought that his behavior was the most normal thing in the world since I had grown up with it. I cried myself to sleep that night. I did some research on it not long after since I didn't know too much about schizophrenia, and I was so traumatized when I realized how messed up he was. I don't know if it was by chance or because I started noticing things, but he became unbearably worse after, and me and him started fighting really badly. My mom finally told him to leave the house, and they had a really messy divorce. I still feel guilty about fighting with him to this day and wonder if things would be better if I had never found out. He lives alone now and isn't allowed contact with any of us. It wasn't originally like that. My siblings used to go and visit him, and he started doing weird stuff to them so nobody could hear their thoughts. I feel so guilty when I think of him living alone without any family around him. I've never told anyone that I found out through my grandma. My mom still has never spoken to me about it. Now that I look back on things, I'm 24 now, I realize that she was being emotionally by him. It was just so normal to us, we never even realized. Story 5. I replied to an earlier comment about my dad having been married to another woman before being married to my mom. What they don't know, I know, is that before his first marriage, he was engaged to another woman. He chickened out of getting married a few days before and just took off to another country, leaving my nana and aunties to tell this girl he had left and deal with the fallout. His fiance was understandably devastated, but then started stalking the house, turning up the doorstep, crying daily, knocking on the windows at night, following my aunties to school, constantly calling and basically driving everyone nuts until Nana told her to bugger off and leave them alone. A couple of months later, my Nana gets a huge bill from a florist, but in Dad's name. She goes to the florist shop to see what it's all about. Turns out this girl has been sending a single red rose to herself every day since Dad had left, and had charged it all to my Nana's house under his name. Nana hit the roof. She wouldn't tell me exactly what went down, but I believe there was a huge altercation between the two families, possibly with police involved, and the ex-fiancee was never heard from again. I asked Nana if she was angry with Dad for putting her in that position. She said she was, but she was also glad he didn't marry that stupid crazy witch. Setting yourself flowers at the expense of your ex? Either that's some legit crazy stuff or just some really good revenge, but poor Nana. Story 6. My mother doesn't know that I was the one who caught her cheating on my dad. My parents had 5 kids and raised on a mechanic's and a server's pay. Nothing super fancy, but we were comfortable. My mother got her tubes tied after the 5th child and just went buck wild. Lost a job she had been at for 10 plus years, picked up a substance habit, and spent every dime we had on herself and her habits. She wouldn't come home for 2 or 3 days sometimes. My dad just did what he could, and he always had done, provide. One night, the BF I had at the time came to pick me up. He told me when I got in the car he had to go pick his older brother up from the bar. While we waited for his brother to come out, here out the front doors comes my mom and some random guy. They were both trashed. Then, as they parted ways in front of my mom's car and his truck, they kissed. I froze. My boyfriend just sat there, mouth open and silent. We had to slide down in the seats when she flew out of the parking lot. Neither he nor I could speak. Finally, Big Brother got in. I turned around and asked about the couple who had just left right before him. He had never met my mom, so no big deal to him. He said they had been there many times before and were always all over each other. Long, quiet ride back. I went home and told my dad. I didn't know what else to do. I was crushed. Mom had beat me home and acted as if it was just a regular day. Dad, after their divorce, told my mom he had hired a private investigator. I still haven't told her, not sure I ever will either. I feel bad for telling my dad, and even worse, not telling my mom. Couldn't win. I don't know why she'd feel worse not telling her. I think she doesn't deserve to know the truth. Also, I think she deserves the money that the dad spent on the private investigator instead. Story 7. I'm the eldest, but only because of something that had happened to the one before me. My old aunt called me his name before correcting herself and telling me a bit. When she realized I actually didn't know, she shut up and wouldn't say another word. All I know is that my entire family knows, but they refuse to tell me anything, and they tell me to drop it because it was some traumatic event that my parents don't ever want to talk about. My dad apparently gave my uncle, mom's side, a black eye just for mentioning it, and dad's pretty calm and cool headed. I'm 19, my brother is 17, he doesn't know, and this will be a mystery until the day they die and I can dig out the information from someone else. Actually, I think this guy should know. He is part of the family after all. I hope he finds all the details when he gets older. Another thing I do hope for is that you find that button at the bottom that has a thumbs up and click on that. And then next to it, you'll find the button that says subscribe. And I'm pretty sure you'll also do me a solid and click on that one too. So let's go ahead and get back to the next one. Story 8. Here's my story. My mother has some episodes. The behavior was normal growing up, but my father said after she left, she'd always been so strange even when they first got married as kids. She had a huge episode after her pills stopped working and she didn't want to take them anymore. Can't blame her, antipsychotics are the worst. My sister and I were late teens and we opted to have her arrested because she was terrorizing us all and wouldn't leave the house. It was the first time my sister and dad actually worked together. Kind of hilarious, it had to be over something so serious. Thank God my parents divorced a few years before then. Anyway, I'm 25 now. It's been 5 years since the last time I saw or heard from her, though I knew where she was living for most of that time. I felt guilty for a long time about it and had nightmares constantly. But I remember grabbing her by the arms and imploring her to accept help that we would find for her if only she would accept it. She looked straight at me and smiled and said, "I'm seeing clearly." And that memory is what kept me away and will likely keep me away for the rest of my life. There's no cure, even the meds are temporary. There's nothing you could have done to make your father better. I bet you missed the old dad before you knew, like I missed my old mom before her episode. But all I tell myself is, I don't miss her. I miss the idea of her I had in my head, which was completely false, an illusion which was doomed to shatter anyhow. Story 9. When I was around 12 years of age, I'm 21 now, my parents would have some fun late at night, around 12 p.m. It was that late at the time anyway, we'd be gone to bed at 9 p.m. Anyway, I'd always wake up to a bang noise, and being the paranoid kid I was at the age, I'd always think it was someone trying to break into the house. I actually made up a plan of what I was going to do if they ever got in. I had a walking stick under my mattress, and if I heard someone coming up the stairs and heading for my room, I'd get it from under the bed and hide it under the duvets. I then pretend I'm asleep, and when the intruder comes near me, pow. Well, yeah, I spent countless hours planning this for years. It was only until I was like 16 years of age when I realized what was going on, and I was just freaking astonished at how stupid I was. That's pretty funny also because I'm sure a walking stick wouldn't do much in a break-in. Story 10. I know something about my dad that even my mom doesn't know. 2 things actually, both of which he told me in confidence. The first one he told me was that the reason cars make him nervous and that he has never taken a driving test despite his own father teaching him to drive as a teenager is because when he was young, probably around 18, 19, just legal drinking age, he went out and drank with a few friends. He was the least drunk out of all of them, so his friends convinced him to drive them home. He wasn't sure but got in the driver's seat anyway, started up the car and it rolled back and he had to brake hard, narrowly missing a woman and a buggy. He sobered up quickly and has never gotten behind a wheel again. The other is about his parents. He always alluded to his dad being quite the disciplinarian, being in favor of using the belt as a punishment, but gave the impression it wasn't much worse than the norm of that time period. But he opened up to me a lot once, told me that his dad was a big drinker and what he did as punishment was really bad. He was scared to talk to his dad about anything. Not only that, but he used to hurt his mom, my gran too. My dad had to step in to protect his mom multiple times growing up, and he forbade her from going out and having friends. This my dad didn't realize until much later after his dad died. We always wondered why my gran never had any relationships out with the family, seeing as she was such a bubbly, chatty person. Now we know, or now me and my dad know. Story 11. I did some research on my dad and my mom told me a number of key things. I'm very sure that I'm right about this, but it is hard to prove. My dad went to college, married my mom so that he wouldn't get drafted. He wasn't doing well in college and they were pulling kids out of college for the draft. They got married on the fly, had to wait for some waitress to get off work to have witnesses, no planning. They had kids because he needed something else to change his draft status. He wasn't there when most of us were born. The marriage failed, and it was clear he never wanted kids. Some people don't feel empathy. It's hard to understand, but that's the way some people are. I've never brought it up except with my mom, and she confirmed that his draft status changed after having kids and that he never did well in college and never finished. I didn't bring it up because I really don't think it would make any difference. People that don't feel empathy don't take blame, they just see things differently. Story 12. My dad was married before he married my mom, and it wasn't to my half brother's mom. Mom knows, and it only lasted for like a year, and it isn't a big deal because they're super left wing and atheist and progressive and all of that. My mom never knew her dad, and he was literally from Palestine, and my dad is half Ashkenazi. So I'm one fourth Middle Eastern and one fourth Jewish. Part of my dad's side are Romani. Dad told me about my mom, and mom told me about my dad, but my mom and dad don't know that I know about them, if you get me. The biggest twist was that my dad's ex girlfriend and mother of my brother was an a hole to him after they broke up because she cheated multiple times and she tried so hard to reduce his custody that it went from 1 week at my dad's house, 1 week at hers, to 5 days at hers and weekends with my dad. They were both lawyers. She still is. He went into acting and such. And she used to be friends with my mom, who is also a lawyer, and she was such a witch to my mom as well that she left her then place of work, which dealt with human rights law, which she loved to do, to being a barrister. I was also convinced he was my cousin until I was about 6 because I only saw him at weekends. What's worse is that I'm really quite good friends at school with my cross siblings who are my age and 2 years older than me, respectively, but we can never see each other for family events because she hates my dad so much for no reason. She has cheated on her now husband and parent of her other 2 kids 3 times. Once a cheater, always a cheater, but don't get me wrong, it's always a choice. She just chose to do it again and again and again. Story 13. I had 2 more uncles, and my mom was the eldest of 8 kids, not 6, like I had always been told. Also, that my mom was born about a month and a half after my grandparents got married. I was researching my family tree and kept coming up with these 2 names listing my grandparents as the parents of these 2 boys who had died before they were half a year old. My mom was a senior in high school when the older of the 2 was born. The younger of the 2 would be turning 40 this year. As near as I can tell, they were both in poor health when they were born. The family friend I talked to attributed it to my grandmother having babies when she was too old to, because your grandmother loves babies and your mother was married almost 10 years before you were born. My grandma would have been pushing 50 for the youngest, but knowing that my mom was a very early baby, if you go by wedding dates, makes a few things make more sense now. My grandparents never celebrated their anniversary and got pissy with me when I was a young teenager and asked if they were celebrating their 50th soon, since my other grandparents had just celebrated their 50th. My great-grandparents apparently had 3 very wild daughters. The oldest ran off to Mississippi when she was 14 to marry a 15-year-old Cajun boy and caused quite the scandal. Then my grandmother went to college for a quarter, met my grandpa, and was married before the end of the school year. The youngest just seemed to really love the wedding part and got married and divorced multiple times. Story 14. Background: I was using my dad's old, maybe 5 or so years after he stopped using it, Nokia phone, which we kept as a spare while my BlackBerry conked out and I was going to buy an iPhone. Story: this phone was not a smartphone but had text, and I was scrolling through the text to delete my old ones as I was going to buy my iPhone the next day. And I found one really old text from my dad to my mom with the subject, "I love you." I thought, "Aw," and opened it. Just before the "I love you," he'd sent a long text apologizing and begging her not to leave him, and that he could overlook what had happened. This text really freaked me out. I checked the year, and it corresponded to the year that my mom had this very close friend who came to live with us for a few days. He stayed in my room on the mattress on the floor, and I bunked with my dad. My mom stayed in my room too, on my single bed. The text really freaked me out because I think around that time my mom and dad weren't seeing eye to eye about our house guest and what overstaying his welcome was. He was a bit shady and used to scam people into investing in some new venture he had every few months, which we didn't find out till much later. I never asked him about it, but I did a little digging of my own and found out that my mom and he were very close friends, never slept together or had any romantic interest in each other. But this guy had convinced my mom that my dad was stopping her from doing what she wanted with her money. A bit of a long story and a sore spot for them, and she would leave and take off to his city with him when he left. He also got her to invest a big chunk in his latest venture, which we really didn't have to spare. Needless to say, they did get over it absolutely, so no biggie, but at the time I read it, I remember thinking, they should have told me. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you're also going to enjoy it just as much. Parents, what's a secret you discovered about your kid you wished you didn't? Story 2 made me rethink having kids, and I'm not so sure about them anymore. I'll see you in that video, and thank you for watching this one.